How are we today? Are we all right? Good. On a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being ecstatic and 1 being nearly comatose and dead, shout out your number right now. Oh, we got some 10s. Excellent. That's good. Well, I've just come back from your young people's camp out that's been happening. And when I left, they were all still alive. So there you go. Not a lot of sleep has been happening, but we've had a lot of fun. So it's been good. And we come to this story, and as we start, I want to show you something. Now, I'm not pretending I know anything about art here. I really don't. But this picture has always captured me. Okay, I don't know if you can see it. This is a really well-known painting from the artist Raphael. Okay, and this was his final piece of work, really. The story goes that he was reading the account of the Transfiguration that happens just before the passage that we've been read this morning. He was reading and he wanted to capture that Transfiguration, that glory moment. So he started painting the figure of Jesus at the top there. But then, of course, he continued reading. And he went past the Transfiguration and came to the story that we've just had read to us. And that's when it struck him that you can never really talk about the Transfiguration of Jesus without what comes next. And for Jesus, there was this moment where he was in all his glory. Perhaps that key moment on earth where he was revealed in his glory, at least until the cross. But then he had to come down off the mountaintop to this group, the masses below. And I'm struck, like Raphael perhaps, this sort of dichotomy that happens so often in life, where we hold the glory and the majesty of Jesus against the pain and the reality of suffering in our lives. And if you've seen me speak in church here before, I've probably spoken about it here before. Because perhaps that's the most challenging thing to our faith. How can we hold the glory and majesty of God and look at pain and suffering and doubt and frustration at the same time? But that's what this story is about. It's about holding those two things together. You know, Christian speakers, preachers, teachers, they often talk about a mountaintop experience, don't they? And we've probably all been there. You know, they're talking spiritually, of course. You know, maybe a camp, a house party, a Bible study, Sizewell Hall, the sunset, whatever it is where we've met with God and all feels right with the world. And we're there, and we don't want to leave it, do we? We want to stay there because it feels so wonderful. And we hear less sermons about the valley of despair, don't we? We want the mountaintop experience, but we don't want the valley that comes at the bottom of the mountain. And of course, we forget that despite the beautiful view from the top of a mountain, nothing grows there. All the growth happens in the valleys. You know, spiritually speaking, in the difficult times, in the Mark 9 sort of times. So Jesus has been on top of a mountain with his disciples. This transfiguration has happened. He's revealed as the God of glory. And meanwhile, happening at the bottom of the mountain, this crowd is gathering. There's this young boy who's been attacked and troubled by this demon. And he's in deep, deep misery. And this is the story as was read to us. At this point in Mark, Jesus is about 6 months away from the cross. His disciples, his followers, have been with him for about 2.5 years. They've grown together. They've learnt together. They've seen Jesus perform miracles. They've heard him teach. They know him intimately. But they followed Jesus by sight. They've been with him physically. But in the next few months, Jesus is going to die. And they need to learn to follow Jesus by faith and not by sight. And it's a key transition for the disciples, actually. And this story, this Mark 9 story, is this hinge point where they have to learn to follow him more by faith, by sight. Where they have to trust the power of Jesus when they don't have the presence of Jesus. And it's in this transformation that we see this heartfelt, guttural utterance of this father who's at his wit's end. He's tired. He's worn out. You know, one of the reasons I love this story is because it is of a good father. You know, he deeply loves his son. You can sense that, can't you? He spent most of his life caring, helping, protecting his sick son. And his son is helpless, probably scarred, certainly disfigured. And this father loves his son more than he loves his own life. And no matter how helpless or hopeless things have become, the father has never given up on his son. He's never stopped caring. This is a story of a good dad. And when you read the newspapers and watch the news and click on your Instagram, you don't see many stories of good dads. I'm sure there's lots of good fathers in this room here. But you don't read about them much. You don't hear about them much. You hear stories of absent fathers and abusive fathers and fathers who use their families. And it's very rare to hear a story of a good father. That's why I love this so much. A good father who, almost on his knees, says to Jesus, I believe, help my unbelief. He's saying, Jesus, I really want to believe. I do believe, but I struggle with belief. I struggle believing there really is a God who's powerful because look at my son. And don't do it, but how many of us might raise our hand in that position too? And at the moment you're sitting here going, I'm a doubting father too, or I'm a doubting mum, or I'm a doubting grandmother, or whatever. I'm doubting God right now. How many of you would say, I love church and I love coming to worship, but I just struggle to believe in God when I look at the world around me and I click on the news? Maybe you're sitting here as a person in doubt right now. There's a quote from a theologian author, a guy called Dale Bruner, who says the Christian faith is bipolar. I hope that doesn't upset anyone here, that language. But the language he's using is, look, we're disciples who live our lives between worship and doubt, between trusting and questioning, between hoping and worrying. That's the experience of us in faith. Try and describe it in a different way. Imagine, okay guys, imagine you're on a ship and you're on the ocean and you're traveling from A to B. But there's a fire on board and all hands are lost. But you're the one who manages to escape and you get on the lifeboat and you watch the ship go down. But of course you're a nautical man or woman and it's okay. You cast your eyes to the heavens and you see the stars and you plot a course home. You sort of steer the boat and you follow the stars. You're filled with a little bit of hope. But the next night, the sky's cloudy and you can't see the stars. So what do? Well, you keep going in the same direction, right? You saw it last night. But it's cloudy the next night. And the next night. And the next night. And doubt begins to rise. Am I heading in the right direction? Am I going the right way? Did I see the stars correct in the first place? For the next 3 weeks, the skies are cloudy and dark, and doubt creeps in, and you ask the question, am I still heading for home? And maybe some of you spiritually are asking that question inside, am I still heading for home? Are you still heading for home, or are you horribly lost and doomed? Have I set my course right? Did I follow the right stars? And in church, there's this subject that we never seem to speak about. I mean, I don't know when the last time I heard a sermon on doubt was. We don't hear sermons about it. We don't sing worship songs about doubt. But perhaps we should. Jesus never seemed afraid of doubt. He never asks his disciples to be 100% certain. He just says, follow me. Those same disciples who gave up their nets to follow him ran away from him when life got tough. When things got difficult, those disciples who seemed to show great faith that they even walked on water denied even knowing him. And when you read through the Bible, Job and Ecclesiastes and Lamentations and Habakkuk and the Psalms, there's lots there about abandonment and doubt and uncertainty. But we don't seem to talk about it. You know, if I were to ask how many of us here are not even quite sure God exists right now, I wonder how many hands would go up. And we might be surprised at whose hand does. Our elders, our small group leaders, our long-standing members, our elders. Because at times doubt is something that we can all struggle with. I've been a Christian for 30 years. I've seen what I believe are miracles. I've seen answered prayer. I've experienced God in my life. I've read the Bible. I love God with all my heart. That I want to say I'd die for his name. Yet every day I have to pray the prayer that says, I believe, help my unbelief. When I see tsunamis in Asia and floods in Pakistan and volcanoes in Guatemala, when I see mothers dying of cancer and street children begging for food and Christians building another multi-million-dollar church next door, when I see fathers abandon families and babies dying before they're born and children starving to death in Africa as I throw food away, when I see AIDS victims wither and die and I see the news of another bomb that's killed another dozen people, when I hear news of a war that's fought, or the world has an opinion on an issue that I don't go along with, and I feel alone and scared to even voice my opinion, at those times, doubts can arise. But that shouldn't be a surprise to us. The disciples were full of doubt and uncertainty. The rabbi whose life they just placed their hands into was nailed to a cross and died. You don't think they were full of doubt at that point? They were downcast. Their dreams were shattered. Their hope had been ripped from them. Jesus was not the Messiah that they'd expected him to be. He hadn't led the rebellion to kick out the Romans. He was on a cross and dead. At that moment, their minds were full of doubt. They were walking away. If you read the story of the road to Emmaus, they were literally walking away. And of course, what about doubting Thomas? I mean, he's even got the name right. Because he wasn't in the upper room with the other disciples, because he was so full of doubt, he didn't even make it there. Betrayed and rejected, alone. He placed his life into Jesus' hands and his expectations were crushed. And maybe that's where your faith is right now. Maybe you feel you've placed your life into Jesus' hands and your expectations for what you wanted him to do and who you wanted him to be haven't been fulfilled. But of course, the resurrection happened. And doubt became hope once again. And for Thomas, that classic line, I won't believe until I see it myself. And Jesus appears and he says, okay, put your hand on the marks in my hand and feel the wound in my side. And Thomas's life turned round, the disciples' lives turned round. But I'm sure in the days and weeks and years to come, they had other moments of doubt. You know, when they're facing the emperor and the emperor's saying, deny your God or die. I bet there were still moments of doubt. In fact, if you're into church history, it's really quite interesting. Legend says that doubting Thomas took the gospel to India. And there's actually a little shrine to him still near Chennai or Madras airport, where it said he was buried. And he was killed by having a spear thrust into his side. It's quite poignant, really. The man who said, "I won't believe until I can touch the wound," was killed by a spear thrust in his side, but still saying, "You are my Lord and my God." You see, this Mark 9 story tells us that doubt is not the opposite of faith. Doubt is not the opposite of faith. You are not a bad Christian if you have doubts. You know, sometimes doubt can be as sustaining as certainty if you handle it the right way. We can't prove 100% mathematically in a scientific way that God exists. But actually what God asks of us is to have faith, to follow him despite our doubts. Without faith, it's impossible to please God. Not without certainty. No, it says without faith, it's impossible to please God. In fact, if we have certainty, it probably wouldn't be faith. And this comes out of the chapter 11, and read the rest of chapter 11, and it's full of the heroes of faith who did some pretty crazy things and at times had massive doubts, but still kept on following their God. It's a bit of a silly illustration, but to help make it clear for you, Rich, you're falling asleep, so I'm going to use you. Now, in case you're wondering, the correct answer to my next question is yes. A strong yes, okay? Rich, does Lucy, your wife, love you? Yes. Good. That was a strong yes. Rich, do you realise you have absolutely no mathematical proof of that at all? No, you don't have to answer that bit. You don't. You can't. What you do is you look at the past history. You look at the past evidence. You look at the marriage license and the ring, and you remember back to that beautiful day. And perhaps more importantly, you look at the actions that Lucy has done for you and the family, the sacrificial decision she's made for you and the family, the words she says and the action she does, and then you act on that faith. And you act on that faith each and every day. Now, it could be an elaborate con. It could be a big deception. She might be out for your money, Rich. But the truth is, you can't prove it. What you do is you act on the evidence you've got before you. And actually, the longer you act on that evidence, the more evidence that's built up and the more you act on it. And that's what God wants from us. We follow him by faith, not by certainty. And it's an incredible story, this Mark 9 story of a man who says, "I believe, help my unbelief." He says, "Lord," I'll come back to that, sorry. He says, "Lord, I believe, even when my heart is filled with doubt." He says, "Lord, I know you can, but I'm not sure you will." He says, "Lord, the situation seems hopeless. Help me to trust you. I believe, help my unbelief." And if you're in that position of this doubt, can I just advise something? Just borrow some faith. Now, some of you are probably thinking, "Oh, that sounds a bit dodgy," right? What I mean by that is our temptation when we doubt is to withdraw. Our temptation, "Oh, I'm not going to church because I doubt God. I'm not going to sing the worship songs because I doubt whether they're true." And we withdraw and we withdraw. I'm advising that we do the opposite. Come and lean in and borrow the faith of those around you. Now, I'm not saying, I want to be very clear, we're not talking about salvation here. Salvation is a deal between you and God, trusting in Jesus Christ and the cross. But in our day-to-day lives, borrow from the faith of the people around you. Come to church. Sing the songs. I don't mean be a hypocrite about it. I don't mean pretend. You can come and say, I'm really struggling here. Help me. Pray for me. Be with me. Help me understand. Help me see what God might be doing. But lean into the faith of your brothers and sisters who've got their metaphorical or maybe even physical arms around you, saying, we're with you in this. Jesus says to his followers, follow me when the way seems clear and open. Follow me when it all seems solid and good. But also follow me when it's not clear, when it seems like we're going the wrong way, when it seems like we're lost. He says, trust me. Now, I've deliberately highlighted one part of this story. I'm going to quickly talk about something else, but I deliberately talked about one part of this story because, in fact, the whole story is littered with doubt. I mean, come to remember back where the disciples, they're praying for this guy and nothing's happened. Inside they're going, we failed. When they wanted us to pray and get rid of this demon, we failed. We couldn't do it. In fact, they asked that question, why couldn't we cast out the demon? Jesus said, you should have prayed a bit more. I mean, imagine how bad they felt as disciples. Imagine how small they felt. Imagine how doubt-filled they felt. It's not just the story of an unbelieving father. It's the story of some doubt-filled disciples as well. You see, the crowd is mesmerized. They've never seen anyone like this Jesus. I mean, there were other Jewish exorcists in that day. You can read about them in the book of Acts. But apparently nobody's had any luck here. The Father couldn't get it done. Even the disciples couldn't get it done. The demon seems victorious at this moment. And again, probably sometime in your heart, you go, Satan's looking victorious right now. But wait, here comes Jesus, and it's amazing. I love it, because there's no deep revelation. There's no sort of 20 minutes of preaching. There's no freaky priest or holy water. There's no bizarre crossing themselves or voodoo or anything like that. Jesus just says, demon, go. And he does, because the demon recognizes the authority that stands before him. And that's where I come just towards my second point. And you might think they're unconnected, but they're connected. The second point is this. God is good, Satan is evil. I can't make it any clearer than that. Because at its heart, Satan is causing the suffering of this boy. There's this boy, probably primary school aged, who's got this horrible condition. He's being physically attacked by an unclean spirit, a demon. Now, I know as I mention these words, some of you are sitting there sort of squirming, being uncomfortable, come on, Matt. It's in the 21st century. You don't really believe in spirits and demons, do you? As you read through the passage, this demon possession seems almost unbelievable, doesn't it? Supernatural activity to our modern mindset, that must be rubbish, surely. You know, it's just a primitive way of talking about a psychiatric or medical or social disorder. Some of you might be going, Matt, this is epilepsy or something else happening. We've outgrown such fanciful beliefs. The problem is the scriptures aren't as accommodating to that popular belief. Succinctly, from beginning to end, the Bible teaches that there is a spiritual world out there that is unseen but can't be ignored. Paul reminds us of it in the book of Ephesians. Our struggle isn't against flesh and blood. Our struggle isn't against the things that we can touch and see and smell and taste. No, our struggle is against authorities and powers of this dark world. Spiritual forces. Now, if you take the Bible seriously, you have to take this idea seriously. C.S. Lewis, the great Christian writer, says people make two mistakes in considering demons and demon activity. They either discount it and think nothing of it, or become too fascinated and preoccupied with it. And when we read the story of Jesus and the biography accounts in the Gospels, we see him engaging in a spiritual world as much as in a physical world. And our story today shows that Jesus is active in the physical world, healing this boy, but also in the spiritual world. He was rolling up his sleeves and sort of getting dirty and messy and dealing with it face on. And the chapter before this one, he had to deal with it again with some demons and some pigs. And as soon as Jesus steps on the land, the demons seem to know who he is. We're not dealing with some charlatan here. We're dealing with the Lord of Lords and the King of Kings. As soon as he steps on the lands, the demons quiver. Because they know who he is. They met him once in glory. They don't want to meet him again. And Jesus again just commands go. He doesn't need to say anything else. Because when Jesus says go, all authority of heaven comes through his voice. It's the same voice that commands the winds and the waves to stop. It's the same voice that commands this demon who was controlling a little primary school boy to go. And the Bible, and the Jesus I follow at least, assumes a spiritual world. And if you don't believe in a spiritual world, you're going to struggle to live as a Christian. Because there's a conflict happening between God and Satan. We see it in this father and his son and the little boy. Identify just for a minute as we begin to close. Mark is calling us to emotionally identify. Those of you who are parents, your grandparents, imagine this is your son or your grandson or your daughter. This is your little boy who's been, for his whole life, been ravaged and wrecked. Imagine a body covered in burn marks and scars and scabs where it says he's been thrown into the fire uncontrollably. You've no idea when the demon might attack and harm. Occasionally he's rendered mute. He can't scream or cry for help. That's your worst nightmare as a parent, right? You can imagine the father is fearful of even going out to work because of what might happen to his son when he's not there. Imagine a father pulling his son from the water or pulling his son from the fire time after time. Imagine a father weeping and crying as his son is shaking violently. A father who probably sleeps every night at the end of his son's bed just in case something happens at night. The father is in a desperate position. His boy's been like this since infancy, and he comes to Jesus as a last resort. I can't do anything else. I've tried it my own way, but now I need you. Jesus, he's my only son. Help me. God is good. Satan is evil. And the reason I raised that bit of the story is because when you're suffering, or someone you know is suffering, there'll be a little voice whispering in your ear that says, God's done this to you. God doesn't like you. You've not been good enough. This is your fault. And there'll be a little voice which tries to cause the doubt to turn to unbelief. That tries to cause the doubt to make you step away from faith instead of stepping into faith. And once you do that, very quickly, the doubt turns to blame. And we start to blame God. When actually what we should be doing is stepping into the faith, trusting in what we've known of him from the past. God is good and wants good things for you. So as I close, I'm going to ask the worship band just to begin to come up. As he was coming towards him, the demon threw him to the ground and convulsed him. But Jesus rebuked the unclean spirit, healed the boy, and gave him back to the Father. And they were all astonished at the majesty of God. And as we close, we see how fragile our faith can be. Jesus, Peter, James, John, they come face to face with the reality of life in the fallen world, having had a great experience on the mountaintop. But Mark has written his gospel so that we would know who Jesus is and what he has accomplished. Every word that's written is to draw attention to King Jesus, who brings God's kingdom to earth. And people who hear his call and respond in faith. And it's written so that we keep on trusting him, keep on relying on him, keep on holding on to him. But maybe we should also learn to pray a little louder the prayer of a desperate, doubt-filled father who said, Lord, I believe. Now help my unbelief.